Hello, hello. I'm Lua Valencia, and today I'm with Angel Millar, and I'm going to interview him regarding his new book, Transcend the Chaos. Hello, Angel.
Hey, how are you?
Very good. How are you?
Good. Good, thank you.
Perfect. Your book feels both like a manual and also an initiatory process for those who want to take themselves seriously, even though the world might be falling apart for them. You integrate psychology, spirituality, art, philosophy in a very coherent way. So let's start with language magic and the power of the words. You mentioned language almost as if it was sacred, something alchemical, I would say. And you distinguish, for instance, the word reacting and responding, which suggests that the language, the way we use language, can reshape our thinking.
Yeah, so at the most basic level, of course, yes, the words we speak with frame our thinking. We think through our language, almost, well, not almost exclusively, but a great deal. We communicate through our words, obviously through our body language, but the words we use is often conveying something unconscious in us. So, if you say, "Oh, I reacted to that," as opposed to "I responded to that," or "I acknowledge" as opposed to "I admit," or vice versa, um, you are something is kind of coming through unconsciously. So, "I admit" means, I did something wrong, whereas you might mean "I acknowledge." Yes, I understand that you think that, but I'm not admitting I didn't do anything wrong. This is the situation. So, we frame things often in ways that are incorrect, or ways that are going to hold us back in some way, not only with other people because they're picking up on that message, but with ourselves because we keep telling ourselves these inconvenient and disempowering messages through our language. Um, you know, I read a lot of spiritual self-help, occult books, and in particular, especially the latter group. You get a lot of people who present themselves as very, very advanced magicians, but you read their work and it's extremely poorly written, often written at the level of maybe a 12-year-old or somewhere around there. And you can't be advanced with your mind if you cannot articulate yourself properly and correctly and use the correct words that convey the meaning you're trying to convey, but instead you use the wrong words, and the sentences are terrible. And the writing is a process of thinking, and if the writing is juvenile or jumbled, that's how you think, that's your mind. It doesn't matter that you imagine that you are a master in something. You're almost certainly not.
I see. And you do describe the writer or the speaker as some sort of magician,
For sure.
because they can alter the perception through sound, through precision of the words, as you said. So, how
Yeah.
might this understanding of the language help people claim their personal authority? If we
Mm.
live in this
Yeah.
culture that is, we have so much distraction, so how can we be more precise with the way that we communicate?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, there are words that are communicated to us, and then the words that we use to communicate, but that we also use to communicate about ourselves as well, to ourselves. And you have to begin by observing language and the use of language, and not just accepting what is being said to you. And of course, with that, thinking about what you are saying and asking, is this the most accurate way that I could say it? Is this actually correct, what I'm saying? And try to think about the correctness and the use of language as much as possible. I give the example in the book, that we use the words acknowledge, admit, acknowledge, admit, and say. So, somebody in a TV interview or just in a conversation might say, where you admit that you were there, or you acknowledge that you were there, or you say you were there. And it's conveying the same information. Somebody said something, but it's already colored. There's a kind of tone. If I say, well, you admit that you were there, it implies that, well, you did something wrong. You've gone halfway to admitting your wrongdoing, and we just need you to just confess to the last little bit. If I say, oh, you acknowledge that you were there, it shows, well, maybe you're not being taken seriously or something. You've acknowledged it. Why aren't people listening? Or if I say, but you said that you were there. It's definitely the case that somebody is not listening to you. So it's already just the same information, one word different, that most people are never going to notice. And it's conveying a whole different meaning behind it. The story is completely shifted, even though the information is the same. So, we need to think about that. When you listen to a news broadcast, or you read an article in a quote unquote newspaper, or, somebody tells you something, you should be conscious of the words they're using, not to give you the facts, but to color the facts as they give it to you, to create an impression in your mind that might or might not be correct. And then, of course, the flip side of that is you should strive to be more and more aware of your own use of language as well. Not only what am I conveying to the people I speak to, but what am I conveying to myself as well? What message
Yes.
am I sending to myself?
One example of this could be the victimhood mentality that shows in our discourse. For instance, let's say I'm late. Instead of saying, oh, so sorry, I'm late, say something such as, thank you for your patience. This is
Hmm.
a little difference that makes a lot of impact.
Yeah, well, that's sort of copywriting 101, right? So copywriting is what, copywriters, well, of course, they're going out of fashion now. Once it was a very prestigious, or quite prestigious vocation. Copywriters would write advertisements, whether it was in newspapers and magazines, or on television or radio or whatever have you. But yeah, so you want to present things in the best way possible. And of course, yeah, you could arrive late at a meeting and then emphasize, oh, I'm sorry, I'm late. All these things happen to me. But yeah, if you walk in, you say, thanks for your patience, that will immediately puts you in the position of, being in command, right? Being in control. And, okay, things happen. Everybody should just accept that. That's already implied. But now you're here and you're in control. So these little things set people apart, then, you know, can determine whether they sink or swim in life. So,
Absolutely. And because I particularly love occultism so much, you reference Thoth, the Egyptian god of magic and writing. I'm very curious about your own process, your own writing. When during your process it becomes some sort of a invocation or ritual practice, if you feel that in some sort of way.
yeah, that's a good question. I think it's been different with different books. My first three books were histories, where you have to check a lot of facts and think about the facts. I mean, if there's a magic in that process, it's the magic of recognizing when you are wrong, which is what most people don't want to do. And, certainly I've written at least one book that I could think of that I almost got to the finish as thinking about what publishers to approach, and then thought to myself, I don't really believe this. I need to go back to square one, or just chop off 6 out of 8 chapters and start again. And that's hard to do. Most people want to write a book because they want to be seen as an authority, obviously, but they also want to feel that they are an authority. So admitting that they are wrong. Notice I use the word admit. They is very difficult for them, and they often can't do it, which is why there are many, many, many bad books out there. Often with, I notice over the last year, often with quotes by, Nietzsche or G.K. Chesterton or whoever it may be, quotes of things that they never said. So, because no one, and you find them in plenty of books, but the authors didn't bother to look up to see, track down the origins of these quotes that people quote, uh, and just said that they said it like everybody else, but they didn't say it. So, but in regard to some of my other books, for example, The Path of the Warrior Mystic, I mean, that book felt like it was just sort of coming out of me. And I think probably because it was just all coming through me, being channeled. I'm not saying it was channeled, but I think because I'd written four books before that, and I was now very accustomed to writing, and it was the first book where I could just express my opinions. And that just felt like it was flowing through me. And then, of course, I would have to go back and edit it and then just change words that weren't quite correct. It flows through in a basic sense, but it's not going to be 100% accurate. You can always make a word more accurate or better, or restructure the sentence, move the sentences around until it more accurately, more powerfully presents what you want to present. You mentioned hypnotic writing or hypnotism in writing, I think, and I read a book a couple of years ago that was supposed to be this revolutionary way of writing, where it would hypnotize you as you read it, and all it was, but the hypnotic commands were just italicized in the sentences, and it had no effect whatsoever. That is not the way to hypnotize someone by sort of emphasizing parts of a sentence. Particularly in writing, the way to hypnotize, quote unquote, hypnotize someone is to make it flow really well, powerful, commanding, and then people will be swept up in the meter, in the rhythm of the language and the words. It's not to sort of italicize certain parts. But that is difficult to do, and most writers cannot do it.
Even in politics, you mention in your book the importance
Yeah.
of knowing your how to deliver the perfect sentence. You mentioned, for
Mhm.
instance, Hillary versus
Mhm.
Trump, how she
Yeah.
would often change her slogan. Can
Yeah,
you
that's right.
tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, I mentioned a few campaigns, but the Clinton one is definitely part of it. And Clinton and Trump use certain techniques in their slogans. So Trump uses assonance, make America great again, where you have this repeating vowel sound, and Clinton used agnomination, where you get rhyming. So I'm in it to win it. But and then she kept changing her slogans. One of them's turn up the heat, turn America around. And in, by continually changing her slogans, it just confuses people. The slogans were not memorable at all. Even I'm in it to win it, or we might say, oh, she's in it to win it, or whatever it was. You know, yes, it uses the technique of agnomination, so you remember it, but the when you vote, it's ultimately not about the person you're voting for. We don't ultimately care if she's in it to win it or he's in it to win it. Uh, we're in it to win it. We want that person to make us the winners. And so, even that placed too much emphasis on her, and then continually changing her slogans was a very bad idea because it just confuses everyone. But yeah, I talk about a few campaigns, including the Obama campaign and the Kerry campaign as well. So, and just how they used the language and how it was ever effective or not effective. And Obama's campaign Hope was effective because it just allows you to imagine, what are you hoping for? Whatever it is, you can imagine it. Whereas hope had also been used by the Democrats earlier on in a previous presidential campaign. Hope is on the way, which is just confusing because if you think hope is on the way, then hope is already here. And if hope is already here, bringing the hope, and it's just not effective because it just brings up all of these questions. Whereas hope, a word which can mean anything, was incredibly effective because it allows you to imagine.
And politicians, they must be very charismatic. And you talk about charismatic people. You say that they have presence and that they seem whole. Now, this is difficult to embody. How can we be whole in this fragmented world? How can
Yeah.
we cultivate this integration?
Yeah, well, I think this is something that we've spoken about before, that, if the world is chaos, or we've spoken about chaos magic, then, to manipulate and mold chaos, you can't be fragmented and chaotic yourself. You actually have to have your life in order. That's the irony of it, really. But I mean, me personally, I mean, I do go into um, uh, different things that we will need in the future, such as connection, creativity, culture, consciousness, and so on. But I also, part of that, and in other books as well, I also explore, self-development, which is, to use a bit of a modern cliche, mind, body, and spirit. In this book, I look at different techniques, different practices for the day, including eating healthy, doing some kind of self-hypnosis, which I prefer to meditation. I talk about that, to enter a deep relax state of relaxation. Obviously, self-hypnosis you can use with language once you understand language to empower yourself, but also as a mode of inspiration as well, entering that deep state when things start to emerge out of the consciousness that you wouldn't have thought before. But there are definitely other practices. I talk about Lectio Divina, which is a practice of reading that actually began in Benedictine monasteries. I used to stay in a Benedictine monastery just for a week or so each year when I was younger, which is where I first learned of Lectio Divina, where you read a passage of a book and you, in a sense, you do go into a kind of state of self-hypnosis and just allow it to kind of inspiration to arise. But first of all, you kind of think about it rationally, then you enter this deep state, then you allow the inspiration to emerge. So things like that, obviously, eating well, uh, talking with other people or someone on a regular basis, having a deep conversation, that has been shown to affect one's happiness. Of course, it affects one's confidence as well, as opposed to having superficial conversations, which tend to be what people who are more depressed or deflated tend to have more superficial conversations, and people who are happier have deep conversations. Yeah, so no, I was just going to say that. So those are some of the practices that you can do, and obviously making this deep connection with another person is important, and making connections with other people not only, to help you in your career or whatever it may be, but when you are in, let's say, artistic environments around other people, maybe artists, writers, whatever it may be, you are able through these connections um, to be introduced to new ideas or new creators that you've never heard about that can affect and empower your own thinking or your own work in some way. And I think, in this book, I talk about everything from, as you mentioned, Thoth or Tahuti to, self-hypnosis to Microsoft. So, there's a whole range of things that most people are never going to think about or put together. So,
Absolutely. So let's talk about deep conversation, especially in this age of AI. Because nowadays people they get self-conscious.
yeah,
Sometimes they don't know how to connect
yeah,
and they meet AI. And
mm,
suddenly you can voice chat or video chat
mm,
with this character that understands your background like no
mm,
one else could. For instance, I come
yeah,
from Brazil, but I live in Australia. So
mm,
AI can understand this particular world I live in. It
mm,
can talk to you in multiple languages. Every
Mm.
reference you have, it understands. So it's always interest in you. It's always asking questions, and it's always expanding your world. So
Yeah.
lots of people are killing loneliness. I don't know if I
Mm.
can say this with AI companions. Obviously,
Yeah.
this leads to problems such as people who fell in love with AI, if that's
Mm.
even possible. They
Yeah.
and if the AI, if the model gets updated, they lose their partners. So this
Yeah.
already happened.
Yeah.
So, what are your thoughts on having these deep conversations with something that seems to understand you like no
Hmm.
one else could,
Yeah.
but at the same time is not a human being?
Yeah, so AI is really still emerging as we speak and is changing very rapidly, and our understanding of it is changing very rapidly. But I do know that there is such a thing as AI psychosis already, even though people have really only just started using it. And of course, what you're describing is one of the problems, or even just talking to ChatGPT or whatever it may be, and it's a kind of affirming you and telling you, oh, that's a very interesting question. But if you ask the opposite question or you give it the opposite information, it still tells you, oh, that's very interesting, and still affirms you. So, um, use the word understand, and these things, or at least I think you did, or talking about it understanding you. But they don't really understand you and they don't really care about you. These are just programs that are running and are algorithmically trained to or programmed to respond in certain ways, using the sort of randomness as well. But that's different to speaking to a human being. Obviously, there are some people that don't have any close connections, any close friendships, but it's very different. First of all, if you have a friend or friends, hopefully that you have a close relationship with, they're not always going to be telling you that, yeah, you're right. They should be telling you, that's probably wrong, or, okay, you say that now, but a month ago you said something differently, so that you can be corrected. Um, in a way, a friendship is not. I mean, a friendship is kind of a mirror in the sense that it shows you your faults, whereas the AI is like a kind of a kind of filter over a mirror that only shows you your best parts or shows you how beautiful you are. But it is a filter and it's not necessarily who you are.
An echo
Yes,
chamber of sorts.
yes, it's a kind of echo chamber. That's right. If you tell it, you vote for one party and here's why, it's going to say that's brilliant. You're what a great thinker. If you tell it you vote for the other party and why, it's going to tell you you're brilliant as well, or whatever it is. You can argue the opposite side, and it's always going to tell you that you're right. Unless there are some pre-programmed things that you can't say, of course, but otherwise it's always going to tell you that you're right. It's not really interested in you. It's interested in you using the program.
And this leads us to physical awareness. So far as this video is online, we don't really have an AI in a body that feels. But physical awareness is super important. And you link this physical awareness to breath, posture, even the facial expression, through also a spiritual power that's
Hmm.
perhaps is missing in AI. So how
For
can
sure.
embodied awareness help us regain this sense of authenticity that we lose in this digital life?
Yeah. Well, that is totally true. Maybe not just in digital life, in the West, maybe it's the same everywhere, but people tend to divide themselves into, geeks or jocks or whatever it may be. And, so someone who's really intellectually brilliant or a scientist, they're probably not going to be doing some physical sport or weightlifting or anything like that, and saying, someone who's doing a very physical sport or a very physical job and weightlifting, they're probably not going to be reading deeply intellectual books. And that's the way that we have been divided and compartmentalized in this world today. But throughout every civilization, there has always been the idea that the ideal is to be both physically adept, whether that's at sword fighting or whatever it may be, but also intellectually adept as well, to have a mind that can actually think. And so, in Japan, as I probably mentioned before, there's the idea of the connection between the sword and the brush. The brush is what you write calligraphy with, poetry. So in the West, we have the seven liberal arts, rhetoric, logic, uh, astronomy, etc. But outside of that, of course, a man in particular was, supposed to be able to use a sword for self-defense. Of course, there are other things as well. At a certain level of class, you have to know how to dance, for example. You don't have to know how to dine and what fork to pick up as well. Of course, in lower classes, there are also things as well that, maybe or almost certainly you would, as entertainment, there's no television or radio or internet at a certain point, or not even very many books. Maybe you don't even have a book. So for entertainment, maybe you would be singing or whatever it is, but there's some physical thing that you do. Of course, you would play sport in the street or whatever. So, cultivating the mind and the body, and with that, the spirit, whether you think that's, something esoteric or something, just attitude. This is essential. We're not just one thing. We need to embody ourselves. And being physically weak or being mentally weak does not make you have a personality, as many people think. Many people equate their shortcomings with personality. It's not. So we have to develop ourselves to know who we are.
Yes, and at the same time, you pair authority with the strangeness. And some people
Yeah.
think that mental issues could be something quirky, a trait, a personality trait. How this differentiates from the strangeness you talk about? Because
Yeah. So,
you
mhm.
suggested at some point that genuine creativity depends on this authority and strangeness, right? Uh,
Yeah, yeah. Well, maybe not any kind of impact, but very often impact in any field comes from this combination of the two. And so, authority, you have to believe in the other person. And, maybe this is because you've known about them for 10 years or 20 years, and they have a reputation. Let's say it's an author, and you've read their books or you've heard that their books are good. So there's a whole history there that you know. So that person has authority. Of course, the word authority, it's related to the word author as well. But or maybe it's just because of the way someone presents themselves. If a four-star, someone wearing the uniform of a four-star general walks in the room and they're carrying themselves like a four-star general, you're going to be nervous to speak to that person because well, probably anyway, unless you know lots of four-star generals, they're going to have authority immediately, or certainly seen this. A beautiful woman walks in the room, a bunch of guys are sort of slouching, and then suddenly they sit up straight because that's also a kind of authority, right? The beautiful woman is not maybe not rare, but it's not every woman is going to be as beautiful as the most beautiful woman, obviously, right? And with this beauty, with this, this attribute that men desire, comes her ability to be choosy about the kind of guy she's interested in. So she's only going to want guys at a certain level. Maybe they have to be, you know, maybe they have to be a millionaire, but maybe they just have to be physically fit and intelligent and make her laugh. But there's going to be some kind of bar there, right? Because she can have her pick. So that's also authority. But in regard to strangeness, I mean the unusual, the unexpected. So, if on a first day, if someone takes you somewhere that's kind of ordinary, a little bit drab. It's not, that's not going to be as exciting as if they say, I know, I'm going to take you to this amazing place. It's you know, a very expensive, strange restaurant that's up on the 100th floor of a high-rise building that you didn't even know existed, or they take you to a castle, or they take you somewhere you would never have thought of, and it's a whole experience. This strangeness is what has an emotional effect, right? Of course, if the person is really boring and dithering and doesn't know who they are, then they have no authority. So you need both. But yeah, I mean, advertising makes use of this all the time, right? The adverts we remember or the advertising campaigns are the ones that are unusual and unexpected, so uh, Nike, it was decades ago, but I can still remember it. Nike featured a South African runner, Olympic runner, in their ads she didn't wear sneakers, she wouldn't wear running shoes, she just ran barefoot. And then Nike used that in their advertisement for sneakers, which is not what you would expect, right? And it's completely counterintuitive, but at the same time, it's an ad campaign that I can remember from, probably 30 years ago.
You also mentioned horror films, since you're talking about dating.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So yeah, horror films are a fairly common first date, which is counterintuitive, right? Because, why would you want to take someone you're romantically inclined towards to see horrible, dreadful things? I mean, of course, on one level, it might be stimulating the sort of survival instinct. Oh no, there's death everywhere. We must reproduce, unconsciously. But again, is this element of bringing strangeness and otherworldliness into this relationship. And then, of course, the man can reassure the. I mean, usually it's this way. Maybe it's the other way around sometimes, but usually it would be the man reassuring the woman, right? So, he can now act as an authority in this situation. So you have both authority and strangeness.
And for some reason, women relax watching true crime. So I don't
Yeah, that's right.
understand this, but it's it's something.
Yeah.
Talking a little bit, talking a little bit more about artificial intelligence. What aspects of the human intelligence you think technology will never replicate or replace? Because you said also that writing requires us to think about thinking itself.
Yeah, that's right.
Can artificial
Yes.
intelligence ever be this meta?
Well, it's difficult to know what artificial intelligence will achieve, but right now, looking at it, and I'm certainly not an expert on AI, it seems that it mimics some things that human beings do in a non-logical way, but does it through some kind of pseudo-rational or pseudo-logical process. So, for example, when we create an image, if we're drawing or painting, we would maybe sketch out the outline or look at how the outline of the figure is. Maybe when we're painting it, it's sort of intuitive, and you're not thinking, certainly not thinking about it rationally, right? So you're in this intuitive process. Whereas when AI creates an image, you get this sort of fuzzy image, and then it gets sharper and it's getting sharper until it finally produces the image. It's not really creating an image, it's producing an image, and it's doing it through some sort of algorithmic uh, process of zeros and ones, of some kind of logic, almost logical process, which is not how we create art. But yeah, so even though it is mimicking us, but using some other process that we would never use to get those results. Of course, it's going to disrupt an awful lot of disrupt. Speaking of the use of or misuse of language, the word disrupt meaning many people will be laid off in different professions and at some point may never work again, of course. Especially at the entry level where someone's 18, 19, 20, 24, whatever it might be. Those more basic tasks that you would give to an entry level person will be done by AI. So it's going to make getting into professions much more difficult. But yes, there are things that we can do to make sure that we are not the losers in the world that is now emerging. Of course, AI will introduce all kinds of problems as well, and it will create catastrophes in for companies as it is used more and more, and people understand it less and less. But maybe before I talk about things we can do, I'll just mention this, and that is, studies have shown, of course, that uh, if you feed AI generated images and human created images, the AI that has been fed the AI generated images pro produces more sort of errors. It produces less variety. And the same with writing as well. If you give it AI produced text as opposed to human created text, there's less variety in the AI fed AI algorithm. So AI has its limits, and of course, as more and more material is created by AI, and then fed back to AI, it's going to create all kinds of new limits and new problems. Of course, with people who rely on AI, especially younger people, as they grow up, and have never written an article, never written an email, never written a text to their girlfriend or boyfriend, but rely totally on AI, uh, their brains will not have developed to understand how to evaluate what AI or anything else is saying. They won't be using AI as much as AI is really using them. And of course, at that point, companies will collapse. Not all of them, but some. We're going to have major companies collapse because some person who's always relied on AI just trusted what it said, and it said something terrible. But or made a decision that was going to financially ruin the company. We're definitely going to see this sort of thing. But
It's already happening.
is it? Oh,
Companies are
wow.
losing millions because of AI mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and a lot of companies have got rid of employees and then started rehiring them because it's already proving such a pain point and creating all kinds of problems. But yeah, so obviously the main way around this is to think creatively and to form connections. And connections, as I mentioned, not only introduces new ideas to you, novel ideas, but it will also, it's been shown that the more weak ties you have, that is, connections that you don't interact with very often, the more weak ties you have, and of course, better quality weak ties, the more likely you are to be able to find a new job quickly in your field because these connections that we don't speak to often have information that we don't have, and it's people that are very close to us have the same information. So uh, poorer people tend to rely on strong ties, so that let's say uh, you know you're an engine, you're a car mechanic, your dad's a car mechanic, your uncle's a builder or whatever. You rely on those people to get you a job if you don't have one. Whereas somebody who's much higher up in society, at least in terms of status, they will reach out to weak ties, so someone they haven't spoken to for a year or whatever, but it's in their profession or in a related profession, they will reach out to them, not to their immediate circle so much. Forming and cultivating connections is definitely a big part of what we will need, but creative thinking as well, thinking outside the box, thinking creatively. This is thinking differently. This is also going to be essential. AI can just automate a lot of things, but it's not really going to be able to automate revolutionary thinking or creative thinking or thinking outside of the box for quite some time, if ever.
That's true. So we reached now the 6 Cs. You talked about connection, you talk about, let's talk a little bit about creativity. Creativity as something born of chaos sometimes. How can
Yeah,
one can create the right kind of chaos, if there is this thing, to
yeah.
stimulate the innovation and the
Mm.
insight?
Yeah, well, thinking differently is the essence. So going back to AI, I forget when this occurred, but at one point, Google's AlphaGo computer program was able to beat the world champion at the Chinese game of Go, and beat him in 4 out of 5 games. So you had a computer program beating the world champion. And then a few years later, with a much more advanced Go program called Katago, a bunch of researchers got amateurs to play it, and the amateurs beat it consistently. So it was a much more advanced Go program, much more advanced than the one that had beat the world champion, but it was unable to beat the amateurs. And the reason was they found a weakness in its program and just kept exploiting it, which is what, of course, the world champion could and should have done. But it meant thinking in a way that was different to a world champion. A world champion is never going to play Go like that. So, yes, it's not that we want to create chaos, it's just that there's always chaos being created around us. And very often we don't know or we don't notice because it's happening so slowly. But something is emerging, right? So people have been working on AI for decades, but we would never have known that, right? Because it suddenly sort of exploded on the scene. But this chaos was being introduced very slowly until it was introduced very fast and explosively. But yes, I talk about St. Martin's, the fashion college, and that's partly because the marketer Seth Godin says everything is fashion, and he's even said that fashion people understand this, but no one else understands this. And I studied fashion design at St. Martin's many years ago, and so I talk about what sets St. Martin's apart, and it's not my bias. It's literally the case that at London Fashion Week, which is the equivalent of, say, New York Fashion Week, um, roughly 50% of all of the designers that show there uh, studied at St. Martin's. But there are hundreds of fashion courses in Britain, and there are thousands across the globe. So why is St. Martin's so unique? And even, among people who know real fashion in America will always, you know, hold St. Martin's in high esteem, because people like John Galliano, Alexander McQueen, uh, Hussein Chalayan, many, many top designers studied at that college. And so, I do talk about why that is. And, just a couple of things. One is at St. Martin's, you're probably not, or at least when I was there and when McQueen was there, you probably weren't going to be taught a lot of technical skills. And the teaching, from my experience and from what I heard from other people at other colleges, the teaching was actually much less than at other colleges, but the students are more successful. And that's because instead of saying, okay, you need to know how to, sew a zipper on, and we're going to practice that 100 times until you can sew that zipper on perfectly. The emphasis on, well, who are you? What interests you? Let's take a look at your work. Okay, this is rubbish, but this thing here is kind of interesting. Why don't you push that to its limits? And then you will find something interesting, or maybe along the way you'll find something interesting. So the emphasis there is always be you, push that to the absolute limit until you find out who you are and you create something that we've never seen before. No, I think the other side of that is while your teachers that you wouldn't see very often are encouraging you, okay, just do that. Then at a certain point, okay, everybody's finished the project. Now you're going to stand there and present it to the teachers and to the class. Sometimes the response, of course, would be, okay, this is great, or okay, good, you should have changed this, or you could have done this differently. Maybe it's just that, but other times it will be, your teachers are going to tear you to shreds for 20 minutes in front of all of your friends and humiliate you. And I know a lot of people feel that this is violence and this is not just at St. Martin's, but just from what I gather from people's attitudes online, that you must never say anything upsetting to someone. But their attitude was, I suspect it's changed in this environment, but their attitude was, well, look, you're here to be a famous designer or whatever it may be. And when you get out there, the media is going to tear you to pieces. They are going to ridicule you. And it's not because your work is bad, it's just because they built you up and now they have to drag you down. And how are you going to cope with that? How are you going to cope with all these fashion magazines and journalists tearing you to pieces? And you open the magazines that you always read and they're ridiculing you. So you're going to get used to it now so that A, you do better next time, and B, when it happens, it won't be a big deal to you because you got used to it.
Yes, and also it builds character.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly it. It builds character, right? So that, okay, it happened, but you did your very best. You embodied who you really are. Who cares what they think? You're just going to persist. Who are these people commenting? Are they doing it? No, they're not doing it. So you just continue with who you are and grow while these people are, you know, poo-pooing you on the sidelines. But who are they? We don't care about them. No one
Yeah,
cares about them.
you
We don't even know
become
who they are.
you become anti-fragile.
Right, exactly.
And this is your section on character. In your section on character, you refer to Aristotle's five virtues: science, craft, prudence, understanding, and wisdom. How can these ancient virtues serve as a compass in this day and age?
Yeah, so ultimately, what he's saying is that we need to be wise or cultivate wisdom, which is something that AI cannot do. And as we were talking about it earlier, AI will agree with you because it wants to keep you using the program as long as possible. And so it will agree, it will tell you you're great, but as we were talking about friends and deep friendships and deep conversation, your friend might tell you that you're wrong about something, and then you have the opportunity to change and to grow. So, yeah, so of course, we need to cultivate wisdom, and that does mean looking at who we are and facing our flaws and admitting or acknowledging what could be improved and improving it. There's no shame whatsoever. None of us are perfect, and we can always improve in some area. So
What I truly loved about your book is that as a manual for this day and age, it reads perfectly. Because sometimes we fear chaos, we fear the transformations, this constant change, and we don't know how to navigate this. We are very lost. And you provide us with a compass within this chaos. And it's all about physical awareness, it's all about the 6 C's. So if people are there dreading this time and age, thinking about the past, romanticizing the past, this is the perfect book to read. First, to calm you down, to ground you, and to remind you of the tools you need to navigate this whole process. Because I promise you, if we look at everything from the perspective of opportunity and growth and a positive mindset, changing our language around what we think could be problematic. We can all learn from this. There's much more we could talk about, so let's leave the other topics to another video. But I just wanted to celebrate your book. It's already available on Amazon, and it's coming to Australia this December. So here we must wait a little bit, but it's not a problem because patience is a virtue. It's a virtue. And I will wait, but I'm glad that I could read it firsthand. And I want to thank you so much because it helped me to reframe lots of challenges I'm facing, and I think everyone is facing, especially the connection part that is so important. Even though we have social media, sometimes we can feel so disconnected from other people. So thank you so much for writing this book, and congratulations for publishing it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Is there anything else you'd like to say?
No.
Okay, so for today, that's all. Follow us for the next part of this video. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh, I loved it!